The vote was already finished when I reached the podium. I could tell by the temperature of the room, not the air. Temperature V3 prime ran cold by design. The kind that never adjusted for human physiology, but the temperature of the attention in the chamber, the specific quality of 23 alien species who have already decided something and are watching the ceremony catch up to them. Every species had a designated position, bioluminescent arcs beneath each tier, shaped for the biology of its occupant. The V3 elevated in the first tier, the orange sealed in their atmospheric processing enclosures, the S-Thara in a humidity band calibrated for their respiratory range. Every physical need had been engineered for, every species had been planned into the room. I had a podium, a single narrow podium at the center of the chamber floor under the highest point of the ceiling where the vertical scale of the room pressed down, with maximum effect on whoever stood. There I had studied the architectural schematics of this chamber for 3 months. The podium's location was not incidental. I am Commander Owen Cole, 2 Combat Tour in the Contact War, Snorts 3. Diplomatic postings in non-aligned space, 11 years of work aimed at this moment, humanity's formal petition for a seat in the Galactic Council. I knew what the podium meant. I walked to it. Anyway, I gave the speech, 18 minutes. 7 drafts over 4 months, memorized completely. I spoke about Earth's reconstruction record, our humanitarian programs in non-aligned sectors, our precision compliance with every treaty we had entered. I spoke about our medical research sharing agreements with 9 non-council species. I spoke about our engineering contributions to deep space infrastructure. I spoke about what 40 billion people rebuilding a civilization from the ground up look like when they have decided to keep going. Velharath, the V3 lead delegate, watched from the first tier, 3M tall, completely still, the architectural stillness of something that has never needed to move because everything around it always adjusts first. I finished. 4 seconds of silence. The protocol system delivered the result, unanimous rejection. The formal reasoning read from the chamber record stated that humanity had demonstrated insufficient restraint in conflict resolution and presented an unpredictable variable in collective governance frameworks. I let the translation complete. Here is the thing about being called an unpredictable variable by 23 species who spent 60 years deciding who did and did not belong at their table. The label was not wrong. We were unpredictable. We had entered the contact war at 40% disadvantage in fleet strength, without allied ships, without interstellar backing, and come out of it still operational and still building. Every species in that chamber had modeled that war. Every model had reached the same conclusion about Earth's survival probability. Every model had been wrong. That was what they were voting on, not our humanitarian record, not our treaty compliance. The fact that every calculation they ran on humanity kept producing errors. Unpredictable was the polite word, the word a committee chooses when it does not want to say the word underneath it. I collected my documents. I buttoned my jacket. I looked up at 23 species watching me receive a verdict written months before I landed on their planet, delivered now with all the ceremony of something designed to look fair. Thank you for the clarity, I said. I walked out in the outer corridor near the far wall. Junior Sathara delegate was standing. Alone, young junior rank by the color. Band on his collar. He looked at me as I passed, not with the controlled neutrality of the chamber, but with something unguarded, the expression of someone who had just watched an outcome they were told to accept and were not entirely sure they did. I held eye contact for 2 seconds. I nodded once. Then I kept walking. That moment went into a specific file in my mind. Kate Arden fell into step beside me, 29 years old, the sharpest analyst I had worked. Within 2 decades of service, she knew when to be quiet. We walked the length of the corridor in silence, nothing but the environmental hum and our own footsteps all the way to the transport bay. She spoke when we got there. What do we do now, sir? I thought about the 11 minutes the vote had taken, the sound of the chamber doors sealing behind me. That particular sound, final and satisfied. I thought briefly about a coastal scanner screen and a set of numbers I kept in a very organized place in my mind. Then I moved on. We go home, I said. Then we start the transport. Lifted from V3 Prime as the second sun set behind the council tower. From the window, the tower rose against the sky. Vertical, precise, perfectly load-bearing, designed to hold the weight of the most powerful governance structure in the known galaxy. Every structure built to hold weight has pressure points. The engineers know where they are. They build carefully around them. They rarely stop to ask who services the building after the original team is gone. I pulled out a paper writing pad, the kind without wireless capability, the kind that exists only between you and the page. I wrote one line at the top. They called us unpredictable. Good. Below it I began list, not grievances, questions. Precise, specific questions written by someone who has decided that understanding a system completely is more important than reacting to it quickly. Who holds the current maintenance licensing on the relay network that all interstellar communication in the quadrant runs through? The council built it 70 years ago. Has anyone verified who services it now? Which of the 23 species voted against membership because they genuinely wanted to, and which ones voted against it because the political cost of voting yes was higher than the cost of voting no? What does a governance framework look like when it is built from the outside without asking permission, without assuming the existing structure is the only valid one? The questions ran to 2 pages before the transport cleared the planet's gravity. Well, Kate worked across the cabin. Every few minutes her eyes moved to the pad. I had not come to V3 Prime entirely without preparation for the outcome. 6 months before the session, an intelligence signal had arrived in my secure queue, partial coded but clear about the structure of what it described. The vote had been coordinated in private sessions over 3 months. The hearing was ceremony. The decision was made. I came anyway because I needed them to make it official. I needed 23 species to put their collective record on a unanimous rejection, not for anger, for clarity, the kind that shows you exactly who decided and who was told to decide, and who stood in a corridor afterward, wearing the expression of someone who had been instructed to accept something they did not choose. The Thara delegate's expression was going into my contact file before we reached the first relay beacon. The relay markers blinked on the navigation display, 1 every 400 km, steady and rhythmic the entire backbone of interstellar communication, laid out on the map like a diagram of something that had never once been asked. Who owned the maintenance agreement? I circled the first question on my list, drew a line to a second question I had not written yet, and wrote it. What happens to a relay network when the maintenance contract transfers? Below that, what is the current legal status of that agreement? Below that, who do I call to find out? I already knew the answer to the last one. The architect, not his name, the only name I used for him, answered a specific frequency, and in 4 years had never once told me something was impossible. He had told me costs. That was a different kind of answer, and one I was prepared to hear. I put the pad away. When we crossed the first beacon line, V3 Prime was a point of light behind us. The chamber doors had sealed with the sound of a problem that thought it had solved itself. I had heard that sound before. It always came right before the interesting part. They gave me a new title 14 days after the hearing. Senior Liaison for Non-Member Relations. 3 seconds of silence when I read it. Then I filed it, requested a travel heavy posting, and went a pack. Title was designed to feel like a career in descent, a window office, a low priority inbox, and the kind of work that keeps a person occupied without giving them anything real to do. The council had submitted through diplomatic channels a request that Earth's representative adopt a reduced profile, while the two parties reconsidered their relationship going forward. Reduced profile, the diplomatic language for go somewhere quiet and stop making people think. I requested the travel posting before they finished delivering the message. Nobody argued. Snorts. Nobody wanted to fight with a man who was already holding a title that was itself an argument for letting him disappear. I took Kate with me. I recruited 2 more people in the first week. Nina Ward was a xenolinguist, 34 years old, from Bristol, trained in 12 alien languages and functionally operational in 9. The 3 she described as still developing. She spoke better than most career diplomats, handled their single specialty. She had undergone a minor surgical procedure 2 years ago that added a tissue structure to her throat, extending her vocal frequency range into registers that human physiology cannot naturally reach. When I asked her about it, she said it seemed more practical than not having it. I told her she was hired. Dan Frey was logistics, 41 years old, former supply chain and infrastructure officer from the Mars Reconstruction Authority. He saw systems the way certain surgeons see bodies, not as unified things but as sets of functions, every function with a node, every node with a dependency, and Dan could trace a dependency chain in his sleep and tell you precisely which link would transmit force if you applied pressure at the right point. He said yes before I finished explaining what the role was. I told neither of them what I was building. Not yet. People do better work when they are following their own instincts. My job was to put them in the right rooms and trust what they noticed. The first posting took us to a trade summit in the Esthara home sector, mid-tier station hosting raw material pricing negotiations attended by Sathara representatives, 2 V3 commercial delegations, and the usual gathering of independent traders who appeared wherever goods and exchange rates were being discussed. On the surface, a minor commercial event. In practice, the Esthara had been operating under a resource agreement with the V3 for 60 years, officially. Described as a mutual trade compact, in structural terms it was a supply arrangement where the Sithara provided materials at below market rates in exchange for access to V3 commercial lanes and communication infrastructure. Below market rates in exchange for access. For 60 years, I spent day one walking the floor and listening. On the second evening, Nina arranged a private dinner with 3 junior Sethara delegates, one from each of their 3 species, Surath, Kalhari, and Vithan. She booked a small room on the station's lower level. I attended as her assistant. I said nothing for the first 2 hours. Nam moved through their languages, shifting registers between the 3 species with the ease of someone who understood not just vocabulary, but the specific grammar each culture used when speaking about things they did not want to name directly. By the 3rd hour, 2 of the 3 delegates were describing the V3 agreement with the precise, careful frustration of people who have been saying something in private rooms for years and have never had an audience listening for the right reasons. The Vethsan delegate, a quiet woman named Orhelin, said nothing about the agreement for the entire dinner. The end of the evening she spoke directly to me, not to Nina, to me. Earth is looking for friends, she said. Not a question, an assessment. Earth is listening, I said, right now. Those are the same thing. She looked at me for a long moment, then she stood and left. By the next morning I had her frequency. By that afternoon I also had a contact from the V3 commercial delegation. Attendance, not an offer, a question, carefully phrased and officially casual, about which Sethara delegates I had been meeting with. They were watching. Already I noted that too. The relay network piece came from Dan. 3 weeks into the posting, he came to me in the evening with a tablet and the expression. I had learned to recognize the specific look of a logistics officer who has found something in a public procurement archive that should not be sitting in a public procurement archive. The Council's relay network, the communication backbone of the entire quadrant, the system through which every diplomatic signal, security, transmission, and operational order moved, was maintained under a service contract held by something called the Durath Technical Guild. The Durath were a species that had gone functionally extinct 200 years ago. The guild was their surviving legal entity, maintained as a contractual shell that had continued servicing the relay agreement via automated systems and periodic hired support. The higher records were also in the archive. Human engineering firm based in New Singapore had been under contract to the Durath Guild for 8 years, handling maintenance on a specific hardware type. Dan looked at me. I can find out exactly which hardware type, he said. Find out which hardware type? I said it was every relay node in the inner communication ring, 34 nodes, the ones the Council's security communications ran through. I looked at that list for a long time. Then I went to find Nina because the next conversation I needed to have required someone who could write in Orin long-form correspondence register, and I did not trust my own fluency in it enough for something this precise. The Orin piece came from Kate. Kate had found a sealed internal council session transcript through a clerical filing system whose security structure had not kept pace with the volume of records being stored in it. She gave me the file without editorial comment, which was how Kate always delivered things, she thought. I needed to sit with quietly, the Orin. Internal vote rationale did not match. The public one, publicly insufficient. Governance maturity. Internally, the Orin had been waiting. Decades for an opportunity to register. Opposition to V3 influence in the outer sectors, Earth's membership application, had been co-sponsored by two V3 adjacent species. The Orin used the vote as a signal we were not their target, we were their cover. I put the file down and sat with that for a while, not with anger, with recognition. They had not opposed us, they had used us the way the powerful use convenient things, without malice, without particular interest, without registering the weight of what they were holding. I wrote to the Orin diplomatic contact I had maintained since my second posting, a carefully constructed letter in their long-form correspondence register, reviewed and adjusted twice by Nina before I sent it. The letter said nothing political. It asked questions about governance theory and the long view of interspecies coordination, the kind of letter that in Orin communication culture is never about what it appears to be about. The response came back in 11 days. Preliminary dialogue on frameworks of mutual relevance. I wrote back the same hour. By the end of the second month of travel, the map was assembled. 3 structural leverage points in the Council's architecture, 3 different kinds of pressure, 3 different kinds of opening. The Sethara needed a framework they could join without V3 permission, a legitimate alternative structure with enough participating species to provide real commercial access. The relay network needed a maintenance contract that could be legally reassigned. It already had one, it just needed the right reassignment. The Orin needed a governance table where opposing V3 influence was built into the structure itself, so they no longer needed cover votes. I called the architect from a secure frequency on a station between sectors. I have a complete map. I said timeline. He said 6 to 8 months for the Sethara framework. The relay contract can move faster. The Orin will follow once the structure exists. He asked about resources. I told him what I needed. There was a pause, not of hesitation, but of someone running serious calculations. The relay contract is achievable, he said. The Sethara framework will take 6 months minimum. The Orin depends on what you are actually offering them. A seat, I said, at a table that does not exist yet. He was quiet for 4 seconds. That is either the smartest play I have heard in 20 years, he said, or the kind of thing that ends careers. Those are usually the same play, I said. I ended the call. I wrote the full brief, everything organized by category, pressure point, opportunity, timeline, and risk, and sent it to Earth Command. With 1 line of cover text, they called us unpredictable. Let's not disappoint them. The authorization came back in 4 hours. 2 words: proceed, Cole. I folded the message into the archive, went to find Dan and Nina, and told them what we were actually building. Nas said, I want to go back to Sethara space first. Dan said, I already started the contract research. I assumed that was obvious. I had good people. The map was complete. The build was beginning. And somewhere on V3 Prime, in the official record of the council chamber, a unanimous vote was sitting in permanent storage, believed by 23 species to be the end of a question. It was the beginning of a different one entirely. The Terran Mutual Compact was announced on a Thursday. No fanfare, no ceremony. A document. Released through standard diplomatic channels to every registered government. In non-aligned space, describing an open framework for trade, infrastructure, sharing, and mutual defense consultation. Available to any species within. Established governance structure, no. Minimum size requirement, no waiting. Period, no sponsorship needed from existing members. No application process, read the terms. Sign the document, done. The Council received a copy by physical courier. Because we were still technically maintaining normalized communication with them, and I wanted this particular message to arrive in an envelope that could not be filed as a system notification. I was on a transit station 3 sectors from V3 Prime when the first signature came in, the Sathara, all 3 species, Sureth, Kelhari, and VTH-San, signing. Within 4 days of each other, Orhilin attached a brief personal note with the VTH-San signature, 2 sentences. She had been waiting, she said, for someone to build a door that did not require her to knock. I put that note in a separate file. 11 more species signed in the first 90 days. Not the large ones, not the Council adjacent powers, the ones the Council's membership protocols had classified over the years as developing or requiring further evaluation or not yet demonstrating sufficient institutional maturity, the ones who had been sitting in anti-rooms and waiting periods for decades while existing members ran their models and decided what ready looked like. Every one of them read the compact's terms and found the same thing I had placed there. Intentionally, no model required, no evaluation period, no sponsor needed from someone already inside. By the end of the 3rd month, the compact had 29 members and a combined raw material output representing 31% of the supply volume. The Council's 3 largest industrial species had been treating as a permanent and uninterruptible given. Dan was the first to calculate that number. He brought it to me on a Tuesday morning and set it on the table without comment, the way he always delivered figures that needed space around them. I looked at it for a while. How long before they say something? I said they have already noticed. Dan said the question is how long before they say so officially. 6 weeks of formal Council communique. Arrived officially a request for clarification on the compact's governance framework using the phrase destabilizing unilateral action 7 times across 4 paragraphs. I counted. I wrote back 2 sentences. We look forward to further dialogue. We remain available at your convenience. Nina proofread it. She said I sounded extremely polite. I'm extremely polite, I said. She smiled the way she smiled when she thought something was going to have significant consequences. The relay contract transferred in the 4th month. Dan had prepared the legal documentation for 8 weeks before the signing. The Dureth Guild's contractual entity, which had no surviving biological members to object, was legally restructured as a subsidiary operating under Terran commercial law through a provision in the original Dureth Compact Treaty that allowed for administrative consolidation in cases of organizational incapacity. Dan had found the provision in the 43rd annex of a treaty document that had not been substantively reviewed since it was first written. The transfer was filed on a Wednesday. Routine paperwork, no announcement. 34 inner ring relay nodes now sat under A maintenance contract that answered to Terran commercial jurisdiction. I told only 3 people the day it happened. Nina, Dan, Kate. Kate asked. When we were telling the architect, he already knows. I said he wrote the provision. The response from V3 Prime did not come through diplomatic channels. It came as a ship, a V3 designation vessel classified as a diplomatic transport, which means it was a military ship with the secondary weapon systems configured to a standby state. Appeared at the edge of Terran diplomatic space on a Tuesday morning and transmitted a request for a direct meeting with the Compact's senior representative. That was me. I took the meeting aboard our station in a room with no recording systems running from our side. I knew they would be running their own. That was fine. I wanted them to have a clean record of this conversation. Velhar came in person, exactly as I remembered from the council chamber. 3M. Architectural stillness, the presence of something that has never needed to hurry, because the world reorganizes to accommodate it. She sat, which meant lowering herself into a chair designed for being 2'3" her height, which she did without acknowledging the physical adjustment of it. She had rehearsed this meeting. She told me to stop. The word she used in translation was closer to cease the current trajectory, but the meaning was plain. She listed what she meant. The compact, the maintenance contracts, the Orin correspondence, a purchase of academic archive data from a V3 research institution that I had made through a licensed public records channel 3 months ago. She knew everything, every item on the list. I sat across from her and let her finish completely. Here is the thing about a meeting where the other party lists everything you have done. It tells you precisely what they consider threatening and precisely what they consider beneath mentioning. Velharth listed the relay contract last, and she listed it carefully in language that was legally precise but not legally confident, the language of someone who has identified a problem they have not yet fully decided how to address. Relay contract was the one she was least certain about. Good. She also did not mention 3 items I had in active progress, which told me exactly how deep her intelligence coverage of the compact actually ran. Also good. I waited until she finished. Then I said, I appreciate the detail. It is helpful to understand which aspects of our operations have drawn attention. She looked at me with the quality of a being that has not been answered in the way it expected. We are requesting that Earth halt the expansion of this framework. She said, we are a registered mutual aid compact. I said our member species agreed to the terms voluntarily. I'm not certain what the legal basis would be for halting a voluntary association between independent sovereign entities. The destabilizing effect on existing governance structures could be addressed through dialogue. I said, we have indicated our availability for that dialogue several times. She looked at me across the table for a long time. I looked back. You understand what you are doing, she said. I understand exactly what I am doing, I said. The translation system carried that exchange in clean, neutral tones. The actual weight of it was somewhere else, in the specific quality of 2 people in a room who both know precisely what is happening and are no longer pretending otherwise. There will be a response, she said. We will be ready, I said. She stood. She was at the door before I spoke again. Velhar. She stopped. Earth extended compact Membership offers to 3v3 adjacent species in our third month of operations, all 3 accepted. I want you to know that was not accidental and it was not hostile. We are building something that has room for everyone. She left without answering. I sat in the empty room for a few minutes after the door sealed. Kate knocked twice and came in. How did it go? She said she knows enough to be concerned. I said she does not know enough to stop it. And the relay contract. She knows it happened. She has not yet understood what it means. She will figure it out, Kate said. Of course she will. I said we will be ready when she does. Outside the viewport, the V3 ship was already departing. It moved with the unhurried precision of something that has never had a reason to rush. I watched it until the display showed clear space. Then I called the architect. Phase 3, I said. How long? He said. 6 weeks, I said. Maybe 8. I will be ready in 4, he said. The compact had 29 members. The relay network sat under our maintenance jurisdiction. 3 more species were in active negotiations. The 3 things Velharath had not mentioned were going to be the most important part of what came next. The Council's response came in the form of what they called a coordinated stability measure. That term appeared 17 times in the official declaration, which ran 41 paragraphs and said in the language underneath the language, one very simple thing: we are going to make this expensive. Sanctions on compact member species. Trade restriction framework cutting compact members off from 17 council controlled commercial corridors. A fleet movement labeled a security exercise. Positioning 12 council vessels at the edge of compact adjacent space where their presence carried a meaning no one needed translated. Not war, carefully and specifically not war. The kind of pressure powerful institutions apply when they want to remind everyone who still controls the infrastructure. I read the declaration on a Tuesday morning with coffee that had gone cold. Then I sat it down and scheduled a compact operations meeting for Thursday. A regular operations meeting, not a crisis session. The distinction was deliberate. Dan had the response architecture ready. Before I asked, he came in with 3 documents and placed them on the table in the order they would be deployed. Relay activation first or commercial reorientation first, he said. Relay activation, I said. Let them feel the communication disruption before they feel the trade numbers. Thursday, he said, not as a question. Thursday, I confirmed the relay activation worked through a maintenance clause. That was the part I admired most about the architecture Dan had built. The Durath contract contained a standard infrastructure provision written 70 years ago by lawyers who had been thinking about mechanical failures, not political ones, requiring emergency maintenance protocols when relay node integrity fell below a defined operational threshold. Under those protocols, human engineering teams had to be physically present at affected nodes within 72 hours, and all secondary network access to those nodes was suspended during active maintenance operations. Dan had spent 6 weeks building monitoring software that tracked relay node operational metrics with extreme precision. As of the previous Thursday, that software was detecting integrity flags on 34 entering nodes that fell just below the activation threshold. The flags were genuine, the readings were accurate. The nodes needed Maintenance, they needed it now. 17 of the 34 nodes activated within the first 12 hours of the official compact. Response: human engineering teams, already positioned through what had been logged as routine assignment rotations. 4 weeks earlier arrived on-site at each location within the required window, the Council's security communication network across the inner quadrant dropped from real-time relay transmission to light delay for a governance body that ran on coordinated fleet positioning and synchronized diplomatic signaling, light delay communication across the inner quadrant was not an inconvenience, it was the difference between a conductor and an orchestra that had stopped receiving the beat. The fleet movement at the compact border stopped receiving coordinated positioning orders. The sanctioning framework's enforcement timeline became uncoordinated. Species that had been instructed to apply specific trade restrictions at specific times were now working from different information at different delays. Velhar, wherever she was, would be running new calculations. The commercial reorientation was Dan's and Nena's work together. Dan had spent 4 months building alternative trade routing for every compact member species that the Council sanctions affected, not identical to what they were losing access to, but structured specifically to absorb the impact without causing material shortage for any compact member population. The Esthara trade routes shifted to compact internal corridors. Materials that had moved through Council controlled commercial lanes for 60 years now moved through routes that the compact owned and maintained. The Council had designed the sanctions to demonstrate that compact members could not function without access to Council infrastructure. The infrastructure was replaceable. Dan tracked the numbers daily. By the end of the second week, no compact member species was in material shortage. Snorts, several were operating under improved trade terms compared to their pre-compact arrangements. The Council's 3 largest industrial members, on the other hand, were now working with 31% less raw material input than their supply chains were designed to handle, because 31% of their supply had been coming from species now routing through compact channels. The Council had run sanctions as if the people they were sanctioning had nowhere else to go. I was sitting in the operations room on a Friday evening reviewing the week's numbers when Kate came in and placed a communication on the table in front of me. Without a word, I read it. Salari, a small amphibious species from a tightly locked moon in the outer compact sectors, one of the earliest signing members, 12,000 people living and working on a station platform that served as their primary off-world hub. Their station had been boarded by Council enforcement vessel, Snorts. The cited reason was that the station was operating commercial cargo transfers in violation of the sanctioning framework. The station's atmosphere seal had been breached during the boarding. 3 crew members had died. I read that sentence twice. 3. I set the communication down. Kate was still standing by the door watching me. I did not respond immediately. I sat with that number, not with the political implications, not with the strategic responses, not with what came next, just with the number itself and what it contained. 3. People who had gone to work that morning on a station they lived on, doing a job they had taken for a species that had read an open framework document and decided to sign it. There is a kind of decision that arrives not like an emotion but like a structural fact. It does not announce itself. It does not wait for permission. It simply becomes. The shape of what happens next. I picked up the communication. I folded it carefully. I placed it in the interior pocket of my jacket against my chest. Then I called the architect. He answered on the second signal. I need the options activated. I said a pause. Which option? Both of them. I said a longer pause. Cole, he said both options. Together, you understand what that looks like from the outside. I understand exactly what it looks like. I said that is why I said both. He was quiet for 4 seconds, then 72 hours to position everything correctly. Take 80 if you need it. I said the first option was an extension of what we had already activated, the Dureth contracts. Second provision buried in the 48th Annex, the kind of clause that exists because someone once anticipated problem nobody thought would actually happen, allowed the maintenance holder to restrict network access to nodes in areas where documented harm had occurred, in proximity to relay infrastructure, pending a full operational safety review. We had documented harm, 3 names, a broken atmosphere seal, a vessel, registration number, the remaining 17. Inner ring relay nodes activated safety restriction protocols within 48 hours of the filing, all 34 nodes every council, security and diplomatic channel in the inner quadrant, all of it running at the speed of light rather than the speed of the relay network. The second option was the documentation framework. This was what the architect had built, the thing I had been building toward since I wrote the first question on that pad flying away from V3 Prime. Every financial instrument the councils, member species held against each other, every binding arbitration record, every treaty obligation, every trade contract, every debt instrument, every mutual guarantee of service, all of it recorded, maintained, and administered through a legal documentation platform built in the 2080s by a Terran legal technology firm. The platform had been adopted by the Council's administrative office as the standard record-keeping framework for interspecies agreements in 2091 because it was the best system available. No one had reviewed the firm's ownership structure when they adopted it. The firm had been quietly absorbed into the compact's administrative body 14 months ago. The records were completely valid. Every debt, every obligation, every commitment these species had made to each other was accurately recorded and legally binding. The compact was now the administrator of those records. We altered nothing. We threatened nothing. We sent a formal administrative notification to every relevant party informing them that the records platform had transferred to new administrative oversight under Terran commercial law and that any disputes or queries regarding binding agreements could be directed to compact administrative services. The Council owned each other. They had always owned each other. They just did not own the ledger anymore. The first response came from an Orin intermediary 6 hours after the notification went out, not to me, directly to Nina through their long form correspondence channel. The message said in their philosophical register that certain parties were interested in discussing frameworks for normalized relations with the compact under revised terms. The second response came from a Council member species whose primary supply agreements were now administered by the body they had voted against. Third response came from a species in the 8th position of the unanimous rejection vote. Their message to Kate was 3 sentences. The third sentence asked what it would take to begin normalization discussions. Kate brought me the count at the end of the first week. 9 council members in active contact, 3 requesting immediate meetings, 2 that had suspended participation in the sanctioning framework without public announcement. The Salari station was being repaired. The compact had sent an engineering team, materials, and a medical team. Within 18 hours of the incident, the 3 crew members were not coming back. That fact lived in my jacket pocket and was going to keep living there, but they 12,000 people on that station were not going to be boarded again. I opened the writing pad. I wrote the 3 names on the front page below the line I had written on the flight from V3 Prime, below the line that said they called us unpredictable. I looked at those 3 names for a long time, then I turned to the next page and got back to work. By the end of the month, 12 council members had opened what the diplomatic record formally described as preliminary normalization dialogues in 3 different alien languages. According to Nina, that phrase translated roughly as we would like to discuss what comes next. I took 3 days before responding. I wanted them to sit with the question. The restructuring summit was held in neutral space. That was Naz' recommendation, and she was right about it. The location mattered. A summit on V3 Prime would have been a performance of defeat for them. A summit on Earth would have been a performance of dominance for us. What the moment needed was a room where the furniture did not carry the weight of either of those histories. We found a decommissioned diplomatic station in the outer sectors, a structure built 70 years ago for a treaty negotiation that had taken 3 months and had sat empty ever since. It had a chamber with a single table round, designed for a previous negotiation between 2 species of roughly equal standing, neither of whom had wanted to be positioned higher than the other. We had the table expanded. Dan oversaw the specifications. 41 seats around a single circular surface, every seat the same height, every arc of the table identical, no elevated tier, no podium. I walked into the chamber alone the night before the summit opened, when the station was quiet and the environmental systems were doing their low background hum. I stood at the table and put my hands on the surface. 41 seats, 29 compact members, 12 council members who had agreed to attend, 1 empty chair placed between the V3 position and the Orin position, which was either a symbolic gesture or a practical one, depending on how you looked at it. Kate found me standing there. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said it was the right room. It is the right table, I said. The summit ran for 4 days. On the first day, Velhar arrived last. Every other delegation had been seated. For 4 minutes, when the chamber door opened, she walked in alone. No aide, no support staff, no secondary representative. 3 m tall, completely still and alone. She looked at the table. She looked at her seat, same height as every other seat, no elevated position, no first-tier advantage, and then she sat down. I watched her do it. I watched her make the adjustment from a being who had occupied an elevated tier her entire career to a being sitting at the same level as 40 others. She made that adjustment without acknowledging it. I respected that more than I expected to. On the second day, the framework document came to the floor. Na had drafted the core language over 4 months. Dan had stress-tested the provisions for 18 weeks. 47 non-council species had read every clause with the attention of people encountering something they had been told for decades they were not qualified for. The document was called the Galactic Accord of Mutual Standing. Its key provisions were these: membership earned by demonstrated governance capacity, not species age, not territorial size, not how long you had been waiting in the antecham of the existing order, security infrastructure, jointly maintained under open contract law, no single species controlling the relay network, no single species holding exclusive maintenance rights over the nervous system of interstellar communication. The Council's permanent seats abolished. Rotating representation, 12-year terms. Open to all member species, and one provision with no formal name in the document. I had written it myself in the simplest language I could find, and Nena had refined it twice. It stated that any species petitioning for membership had the right to public hearing and a recorded vote. A vote against membership had to be accompanied by a written statement of specific reasoning placed permanently in the public record. You could still say no. You just had to say why in writing in front of everyone. When I read that provision aloud in the chamber, I read it carefully and without emphasis. I let the words carry themselves. The room was quiet when I finished, not the quiet of objection, the quiet of people processing something that was simple and once heard obvious, the kind of principle that makes you wonder why it had never been the rule. On the third day, the economic framework passed. Trade routing structure, the supply agreements, the infrastructure sharing protocols. Dan presented the numbers across 2 hours in the most technically precise delivery I had ever watched anyone give. By the end of it, 4 council members who had arrived skeptical were asking logistical questions, not objection questions, planning questions. The difference between those two types of questions is everything. Velhar spoke twice during the 4 days. Wants to ask a clarifying question about the infrastructure provisions, wants to propose a modification to the security consultation framework that was, I noted, on the record, genuinely constructive. I acknowledged it as such. She received the acknowledgement without expression, but she had heard it, so had the room. On the 4th day, the signatures began. The rotation moved around the table. The order of the seating arrangement, which had been drawn by rotation rather than status, the orange signed 4th. Their mark was a frequency pattern, registered on a specialized receiver. Dan had arranged the Sithara, all 3 species signed within minutes of each other, the way you do something you have been waiting to do for a long time. Then she was in the 31st position. She had been at the table for all 4 days. When the signature rotation reached her, she picked up the marking instrument and paused, not from hesitation, from the quality of a pause that is the last beat before something permanent. She pressed her mark to the document. I watched her do it. She looked up across the table and found me. We looked at each other. Across 40 other species and several 100 years of accumulated history, I reached for the tea service that Kate had placed to my left that morning. 3 types. I offered it across the table. She looked at the tray, then at She reached across and took a cup. Her biology registers no flavor from human tea preparations. This is documented in V3 physiological records that I had read years ago. The taste meant nothing to her physically, but she drank the full cup without setting it down. I had not expected the full cup. That told me something. After the signing, the room cleared in stages. Delegates moving to smaller sessions, to calls with home governments, to the logistics of what came next. Kate was managing 4 simultaneous conversations. By the door, Dan was deep in a real transition timeline discussion with 2 compact members and an Orin technical representative. Now was laughing at something a Cathara delegate had said in Kalhari, something I did not have the language to follow. I sat at the table. As the chamber emptied, a young human diplomat from the Compact's administrative office approached from the side entrance. He had been working the summit as support staff. He held a small recording device and raised it as a question. I nodded. Commander Cole, he said, for the public record, what does it feel like to have one? I looked at the question for a long time. What does it feel like? I thought about a voting chamber and 11 minutes and the word unanimous. I thought about a coastal scanner screen and numbers stored in a very organized place. I thought about 3 names in the front page of a writing pad. I thought about 14 months of careful work, about Orhilin saying she had been waiting for a door that did not require her to knock, about Dan finding a relay contract in a 43rd annex, about now growing a secondary tissue structure in her throat because it seemed more practical, about Kate who never needed anything explained twice. I thought about what the word one actually meant. It was not the right word. Victory implies an enemy, and I had not spent 14 months trying to defeat anyone. I had been trying to build something. The thing I had built had a specific purpose that had nothing to do with standing over the people who had voted against us. What I had been trying to do from the first night on that transport with a writing pad was make sure the next species that got told not yet had somewhere to go. The empty chair between the V3 and Orin positions was still at the table. I had placed it there before the summit opened and had not explained it to anyone. It was for the species that would petition for membership in the next 5 years, the ones not yet visible in the public record of the galactic community, the ones sitting in ante-rooms right now being told to wait. They would now find a table with a seat at it, a provision in the founding document that said, you may still be told no, but whoever tells you no must write down exactly why for everyone to see permanently. That was what the chair was for. That was what all of this had been for. I looked at the young diplomat with his recording device. Ask me again in 50 years, I said. He blinked. Sir, come back in 50 years and ask me whether it held. I said, right now I can tell you what we built. Whether it does what it is supposed to do is a question that takes longer than a signing ceremony to answer. He lowered the recorder, uncertain whether he had what he needed. He had not. That was fine. The honest answers are rarely the convenient ones. I stood. I picked up my writing pad from the table's surface where it had been sitting for 4 days. I looked at the front page, the one line written on a transport flying away from V3 Prime 14 months ago, and the 3 names written below it. I turned to a clean page. I wrote the date, the location, the words Galactic Accord of Mutual Standing. Signed 41 member species, founding. Document on public record, then one more. Line beneath that, the door is open. Keep it open, Kate appeared at my side. We walked out together, the corridor. Outside was full of the organized movement of a summit completing its work, delegates, staff, translation. Officers, the practical motion of something becoming in the public record. What it would be called for the next 100 years, the word historic always bothers me. It makes things sound inevitable, as if someone had always been going to build this table in this room, as if the outcome had been written somewhere in advance and all we did was arrive at it on schedule. That is not what happened. What happened was a vote that thought it was final, a podium that believed it had defined a ceiling, and a man on a transport with a paper writing pad who decided that the most useful response to a closed door was to learn exactly how the door was built and then go build a different one. The relay network sat under joint compact administration. The original council would continue operating, restructured, rotating, its permanent seats replaced, with a 12-year cycle beginning its first rotation in 8 months. The compact members and the former council members were now technically and legally and by their own signatures members of the same body. One table, 41 seats more coming. Velhar was in the corridor ahead of us. She was in conversation with an Oran representative, a direct bilateral conversation between a V3 delegate and an Oran representative that 3 years ago would have required cover votes in political maneuvering and a convenient, unrelated species to absorb the friction. They were standing in a corridor talking. I watched that for a moment, then Kate said, "What is next?" I thought about the empty chair, about the petition provision in the founding document about the species currently in anti-rooms in systems we had not reached yet, about the applications that would come through the new process and what would happen when they did. There are 14 species in the outer sectors we have not approached yet, I said. Na has their linguistic files, Dan has their trade data. We begin outreach next week. And the compact administration. Kate said, "It runs itself now," I said. "That is the point of building something correctly." Snorts, "You build it so it runs without you." She nodded. She had known that was the answer before she asked. Outside the station's viewport, neutral space extended in every direction. No council jurisdiction, no compact boundary marker, just the open gap between the structures that existed and the structures that had not been built yet. I had a writing pad. I had a list of questions on the next clean page. I was going to need more pages. The table behind me had 41 chairs and room to add more. The interesting part, I thought, was going to last a while. That suited me perfectly.